So before we start, again, one of the reasons it's important, and I think I might have mentioned it last time, is that obviously, everything that we do at the center stems from the teachings of Rav Ashlag. And the strongest way to connect to Rav Ashlag, besides, as we learned last week, the importance of achieving dvekut with our mind to the Creator, but specifically to connect to the energy of Rav Ashlag. And especially these sections that are here in the beginning, it's really, as Rav Ashlag says, that the day that the Ari of Isaac Luria revealed these secrets is at least as important as the revelation at Mount Sinai. Because again, these are the type of things, even beyond the level of nevuah, beyond the level of prophecy, what the Ari of Rav Ashlag, what Rav Isaac Luria reveals here. And then again, to really appreciate the zchut, the merit that we have to have access to these words, again, that are beyond the level of nevuah, beyond the level of prophecy. So the Ari says, "Daki terem shenetzlu haneetzalim v'nivreu hanivraim." You should know that before the creations were created and the emanations were emanated and the creations were created, haya or elyon pashut memale kol hametziut. A simple supernal light filled all that there was. And I'm assuming most of you have heard in speaking about the Or Pashut, the simple light, what we spoke about on Shabbat, that one of the ideas that we learn from here is that if we truly want to connect to the light of the Creator, we have to be simple. Because the light of the Creator, the Or Ein Sof, the light of the endless, is Pashut, is simple. And a word that Rav Ashlag will get to, the idea of filling, we know that, and it's easier in the first few sections, but it's important to keep repeating this, that nothing here is of a physical nature. So when it talks about filling, it certainly does not mean any physical sense, but I think that's something I think most of us at least have an understanding of. V'lo haya shum makom panui, and there was no empty space, empty room. B'bchinat avir ekani. There wasn't what is referred to as empty air, and as the Ari will explain, that's the Od HaChasadim, Rav Ashlag will explain, it's the Od HaChasadim, v'chalal, and any space. Ela haya hakol memule min or ein sof pashutahu. Everything was filled with the endless, simple light. V'lo haya lo bechinat rosh, v'lo bechinat sof. There was no beginning, and there was no end. There was one simple, equal light. And this light that we say was completely filling everything is what is referred to as the light of Ein Sof, the light of the endless. Rav Ashlag begins, we have to know that the whole wisdom of Kabbalah is based on spiritual matters. Sheinam tofsim lo makom velo zman, that do not take up space and do not fall under the rules of time as we know them. Ve'ein he'eder u'tmura noheg bahem kol ikar. And there is no lack, meaning if there was once a revelation, it never disappears. U'tmura, and change, noheg bahem kol ikar. There is no lack or change that can be spoken about when we're referring to the spiritual worlds. V'chol hashinuim hanemarim b'chokhmah hazot. And whenever there are changes, whenever as we will learn and continuously learn, this happened and then that happened, it seems to be changes to the original form. Ein zot omeret she'habchina harishona ne'ederet. It does not mean that the original or first form disappears or goes away. Umekabelet tzura acheret. Neither does it mean that it changes form. Ela hashinui ha'amur hu inyan tosefet hatzura levad. The change that the Ari refers to, or the Ari speaks about, is an additional form. V'tzura harishona eina zaza mimkoma. But the original form, the first situation, the first reality, does not move, does not become diminished, and does not change. And it's interesting, when you think about them, and I hope we all think about these concepts, not just as we study them, but as we read them the first time, as we study them again. When Rav Ashlag begins, he's really telling us two different rules. Three, but two. No time or or movement. And then he says there is no addition or removal. Now, time and space is something that I think all of us can accept in a spiritual sense. If you're talking about spiritual forms, obviously it's beyond the realm of time and space, because time and space only make sense within the physical form. But the idea of ein he'eder u'tmura, the idea that there is no lack and there is no change, is not a given. It is something that is a revelation of Rav Ashlag, that there can't be any he'eder u'tmura, and as he says, why? Because lack and change are a rule of the physicality. But there cannot be lack or change in the spiritual essence. And this teaches us many things, but one of them is just to appreciate, again, the revelations from Rav Ashlag. Because I think, like I said, I think many of us can accept that there is no time and space when we're talking about these spiritual forms. But the idea that there can never, ever be he'eder u'tmura, there cannot be lack or change in spiritual forms, is again a revelation from Rav Ashlag. And the reason he gives, and this is one of the beauties, again, of studying from Rav Ashlag, is that we learn spiritual laws that we would not have understood otherwise. And what he says, and this is something we can take into our own lives, if we experience lack, if we experience big shifts and changes, it cannot be coming in any way from a connection to the light of the Creator. Because the true spiritual essence, as Rav Ashlag says, there is no he'eder u'tmura, there is no change, and there is no lack, removal. Because lack and change is the way that the physical world operates, is the way the reality is in the physical world. And this is what is so difficult for those who begin this study. כי תופסים הדברים בביטויים הגשמי, בגבולים של זמן ומקום, חילוף ותמורה. What happens, and unfortunately this is the way most people had studied Kabbalah throughout the ages, is that when you read from the Ari that this happened and that happened, there was a sense that there was time involved, there was a sense that there was space involved, then there was a sense that there was change and lack. אשר המחברים השתמשו בהם רק לסימנים בעלמא. And this is again what we spoke about last time, and Rav Ashlag keeps stressing. These terminologies, these words that are used by the Mekubalim, by the Ari specifically here, that talk and refer to terms that can be translated literally as time, space, change, and lack, are only signposts to their al shorshehem ha'elyonim, to their supernal sources. ולפיכך, and Rav Ashlag says, and therefore, etametz lefaresh kol milah umilah b'tziviyona ruchani. I will try to explain every word in its true spiritual meaning and essence. המופשט ממקום ומזמן ומתמורה. That is completely removed, completely disassociated from space, from time, and from change. ועל המעיינים מוטל לחקוק היטב בזיכרונם את פירוש המילות ההן. And this is again, as we mentioned last time, and as Rav Ashlag mentions time and time again, it's important for all of us who are studying this to literally engrave within our minds this new language and these new meanings, therefore, within this new language. את פירוש המילות ההן כי אי אפשר לחזור עליהם בכל פעם. Because basically what Rav Ashlag is saying, once he's given an explanation, he's not going to repeat it. And if we forget it and continue studying, then we're never going to be able to truly understand. So Rav Ashlag begins in discussing the first seemingly physical word, terem, before. Before seems to indicate time. And Rav Ashlag says, Surat hazman haruchani nitbaer hiteb lekaman. Later on, Rav Ashlag will go into a deeper understanding of spiritual time. It certainly does not refer to time as we know it. Rather, it's talking about cause and effect, as Rav Ashlag will explain later. Then he talks about, and this is, again, Or Elyon, again, something because those of us who have been around the center know that light never refers to simple light, but you can imagine that the poor people who were studying from the Ari before Rav Ashlag, we take it as a given. But the people who were studying this before Rav Ashlag, many of them, I'm sure, came to the conclusion that it was some form of light. Some form of light, of course, as Rav Ashlag says. This light that we're referring to is the light that comes from the Creator. Veda, and you should know, all the names, all the things that are discussed in the wisdom of Kabbalah, einam chas v'shalom be'atzmut haborei yitbarach. And this is again something that sometimes I think sometimes gets confused. Ela rak ba'or ha'mitpashet me'atzmuto yitbarach. We never talk about the Creator. You know, when people, again, whether we're talking about the Yud Ke Vav Ke, we're talking about all the names that we talk about, none of them are talking about God. They are manifestations of the light of God, and more specifically, the way we react from those manifestations. You know, one of Rav Ashlag's big revelations is that the light of the Creator and our interaction with that light that flows from the Creator is only understood, of course, and as Rav Ashlag will explain later, will only be understood to whatever degree we understand, to our understanding. And therefore, when we talk about the names of God, when we talk about the manifestations of God, those are all terminologies and understandings of the vessel, coming from our, down looking up. But they never, besides what Rav Ashlag is saying here, that we never actually even talk about the light of the Creator, even the manifestations of the light of the Creator, which is what we're talking about, is not complete, because they are only as they are understood by the vessel. Because within the light of the Creator, as far as the essence of the Creator, we never speak about it. Because this is again another spiritual rule from Rav Ashlag. Again, this is one of these rules that we have to truly engrave in our mind. That whatever we do not comprehend, whatever we cannot have a complete understanding of, we cannot use a word to describe it. Remember this and you won't make a mistake. And there's something that needs to be thought about. Why this rule? We won't know, we can't say its name. All of us, I think, throughout our lives talk about things that either we don't completely know or don't completely comprehend. Now, even though, taking it to even a higher level, as we begin the study now, we're going to talk about worlds, whether we talk about the world of the light of the Creator from Ein Sof on. We don't have a true comprehension of them, but we're still going to talk about them. So this is not a given rule within our world that only things that we completely comprehend can we give it a name. Right? So many of us know names of things that we don't completely comprehend. For instance, many of us, Baruch Hashem, have never experienced Great Depression. At least hopefully many of us haven't experienced Great Depression, but we can use the word depression and to some extent think that we have some comprehension of it. It's maybe something that we know to a greater degree. We all talk about things all the time that we don't really, truly understand. So this rule of Kol ma shelo nasig lo nedayo b'shem, everything that we don't comprehend, we cannot give it a name, is a rule in the spiritual world, not necessarily a rule that we follow. It's actually a rule that we, in our own lives, in our own discussions, in how we talk and what we talk about, we certainly don't follow this. So there's 2 points to this. One is, and this is something that Rav Ashlag made very clear, that the basis of understanding Kabbalah is being true. That without a connection to truth, to emet, a person cannot truly comprehend, cannot truly connect to the light of Kabbalah. So when we talk about, when Rav Ashlag says, Kol ma shelo nasig lo nedayo b'shem, anything that we cannot comprehend or don't comprehend, we cannot give it a name. Why? Because it won't be true. Because if we talk about things, which we do, and unfortunately most of us are not truly connected to the essence of truth, but the Kabbalists could not give names to things that they could not fully comprehend because it does not fall under the category of truth. So one of the understandings is an appreciation for truth, and an appreciation that we cannot have a true connection to this wisdom of Kabbalah, a true connection to the light of the Kabbalists, if we don't strive for truth. So, Kol ma shelo nasig lo nedayo b'shem, whatever we cannot comprehend, we won't know what name mean. The reason for that rule is its root in truth. That if the Kabbalists knew that they could not comprehend it, they couldn't talk about it. All of us, unfortunately, again, talk about things, even teach things that we don't truly comprehend. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's okay. But to whatever degree that we are away from truth, we have to be separated from the wisdom of Kabbalah. We know that, as the Rav always told the story, that Rav Ashlag, when he was a very young age, he got to the point where he literally could not speak something that was not true. And that was why, of course, the wisdom of Kabbalah is called Torah Ha'emet, the wisdom of truth. And to the degree that we are away from truth, that we are not 100% connected to truth, we are not 100% and cannot be connected to this wisdom. So that's the first idea, that this concept of Kol ma shelo nasig lo nadayu b'shem, whatever we cannot truly comprehend, we cannot speak of it, we cannot give it a name. The source, the root of that rule is because the wisdom of Kabbalah is based on truth. But the second and important thing is the fact that when Rav Ashlag says that, and it's a kabbalistic rule, what he's saying is that the Kabbalists could not talk about something that they did not, or could not at least, fully comprehend. We can talk about it, right? Many of the concepts that we're going to discuss are things that we connected to one degree or another, but not 100%. We are not on the level of Kol ma shelo nasig lo nadayu b'shem. We are going to give names and talk about things that we do not fully comprehend, but that's okay within the framework of this wisdom. But to understand, and I hope this is clear, that what the concept of Kol ma shelo nasig lo nadayu b'shem means, in its truest sense, is that the greatest Kabbalist would never give a name, would never discuss, if it was something that they could not completely comprehend. So two ideas, and I hope they were clear. The third, Rav Ashlag says, and this is again one of those sections, and we talked about this, and I hope that as we study, we not only study this, but literally fill our mind throughout the week with these ideas, with these concepts. And this letter Gimel here is one of these concepts that I hope not only now as we study it, but truly, this is a concept that we, think about constantly, and because the more we think about it, the more we put our mind to it, the more connected we are to it. Rav Ashlag is referring to the words that Rav Isaac Luria said. It said, Or elyon pashut memale kol hametziut, that this simple supernal light filled all of what was. Ulichora tamua meod. Rav Ashlag says, seemingly this doesn't make sense. Halo hamedubar kan hu beterem shenivreu ha'olamot. What we are talking about here, what Rav Ashlag is talking about here, is the time before anything was created. So what is there? What reality is there? What possible vessel could there be? That the supernal light needs to fill it. Right? If, as the Ari says, that we're talking about here, this is a piece of information that he's giving to us of how things were before the emanations were emanated and the creations were created, then how can we be talking about anything being filled? There was nothing. There was no vessel. There was nothing. Va'inyanhu and Rav Ashlag, again, to really appreciate, again, this is one of these ideas, especially in these first few sections of the Talmud Sfirot. Rav Ashlag, there's a letter that the Rav Brandwein had, and unfortunately the Rav did not get it from Rav Brandwein, where Rav Ashlag asked he had a vision, and he asked the Creator to give him the levels of nevuah of the prophets. And the Creator told him, he says, what you have achieved, the levels that you have achieved, are higher than the levels of the prophets. And without going into the details, the Zohar explains that there are two levels of connection. There was the levels of the prophets, which usually is considered a vision which is not clear, aspaklare de lo meira, a vision which is not clear. And then there was a level of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses, which was a clear vision. And when we talk about a clear vision, the difference between an unclear vision and a clear vision, we can explain that what the Ari Rav Isaac Luria's words are to people without the understanding of Rav Ashlag, an unclear vision. All the Kabbalists, until the time, from the Ari, from Rav Isaac Luria's time on, until Rav Ashlag, when they saw anything, they probably saw it to the level of the prophets. When they studied from the Ari, from Rav Isaac Luria, they could only understand it on the simplest levels, in an unclear way. What Rav Ashlag revealed was aspaklaya de ameira, a clear vision. So to have this clarity, again, this is only on the level of Ruach HaKodesh, that Rav Ashlag received this from his teacher and received it through divine inspiration, and really to have an appreciation for these words that are revealed, unlike anything else that we study. Unlike anything else that we study that is sort of, to one degree or another, a tzaddik reveals through his own understanding. These are concepts which were revealed only through Ruach HaKodesh, through divine inspiration. And Rav Ashlag, who achieved the level of clear vision beyond the level of the prophets. Rav Ashlag says, Ki kol ha'olamot ve'kol ha'neshamot sheyeshnam, all the souls that are in the world and that were in the world, ve'atidim lehibarot, and all those souls that will eventually be created, im kol mikrehem ad letachlit tikunam, with everything that will occur to them until their ultimate correction. Hinem kulam kvar klulim ben sof baruch hu. They are all included within the endless light of the Creator. Bechol tifartam ubechol miluam. Everything that will be, that will ultimately bring all the souls to their complete perfection, they are already in existence in the endless light. באופן שיש לנו להבחין בית עיקרים בכללות המציאות שלפנינו. So that, as Rav Ashlag says, we have to understand two important times, aspects, in everything that is in front of us, in creation. עיקר א', the first reality, בבחינת מה שהם קבועים וקיימים באינסוף ברוך הוא בכל שלמותם ותפארתם. The first reality is the way they are, our souls, the souls of all humanity, in their perfection, in their completion. They are already existing in the endless world. Ha'ikar bet, the second reality, כמות שהם ערוכים ומשתלשלים ומתחדשים לפנינו מאחר הצמצום האלף, בחמש העולמות המכונים אדם קדמון, אצילות, בריאה, יצירה, עשייה. The second reality is the reality that we live, unfortunately, still within, to the most degree. The way the worlds after the first restriction, Tzimtzum Aleph, and as the world became created, of course, the five worlds, Adam Kadmon, Atzilut, B'riah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. The way the worlds came into being, the way our souls came into being, the way our lives have gone in previous incarnations, in this incarnation. That reality within which humanity is still working on our correction is the second reality. Now, these two realities coexist at the same time, because the Ein Sof, the endless light, the endless world, is a reality of perfection within which our souls are already complete. And what we actually do, and this is something, again, that Rav Ashlag explains in the introduction to the Zohar, that what we're doing is doing the work of our perfection, the middle work that will bring us to perfection, and then that reality of perfection already exists in the supernal world because there is no time, space, and motion. So the perfection that we and humanity will achieve is already a reality in the Ein Sof, in the endless world. So we, every single one of us, and the humanity already exist in perfection in the endless world. Because, and this is something, again, that gets a little bit complicated, and there are questions that arise from this, but because we have already achieved that perfection. Literally, again, as Rav Ashlag explains in the introduction to the Zohar, the reason why everything is perfect in Ein Sof, the reason why everything is perfect, and we are perfect, and humanity is perfect in the endless world, is because of the work that we, humanity, does during this time of correction. And because the endless world is not confined within the realm of time, therefore the perfection that we will achieve is already a reality in the endless world. And this is what the Ari says, Asher Or HaElyon HaNimshach MeAtzmuto Yitbarach, that the supernal light that flows from his essence, from the Creator's essence, Haya Memale et Kol HaMetziut, filled the entire reality. Dahainu Klalut HaMetziut Shebeikar HaAlef. This refers to the reality of the first reality, which is the reality of perfection. מבחינת מה שהם ערוכים וקיימים מאין סוף ברוך הוא שמטרם הצמצום. As they are in the endless world before the tzimtzum, before the Creator's removal of the light. Umashmienu, and the Ari is telling us, She'or ha'elyon haya memale otam legamrei, ad shelo nishar bahem shum makom panui, that the supernal light filled them so that there was no empty space. She'efshar lehosif bahem shlemut v'tikun kolshu, that there was no room for addition, there was no room for correction. And again, I hope it's clear, because here, and this is one of the things that bothered me until you put it together with what Rav Ashlag says in the introduction to the Zohar, that the perfection of Ein Sof, the perfection of the endless world, is not unrelated to the work that we do. It is not unrelated to the Gemara Tikkun. It is not unrelated to where we ultimately will go. But rather, as Rav Ashlag explains in the introduction to the Zohar, because we, humanity, are destined and certain to achieve our perfection and correction, therefore that reality already exists in the endless world. And it's very interesting to me, and again, as an aside, that Rav Ashlag does not go into this idea here, because it's seemingly an idea without its conclusion. Because if you just read these words here, as Rav Ashlag writes them, it sounds as if the endless world is perfect even regardless of what occurs to humanity from the tzimtzum, from the restriction on. And at least as the way Rav Ashlag explains it in the entrance to the Zohar, the introduction to the Zohar, that's not necessarily true. That the endless world is perfect, as Rav Ashlag explains there, because of the work that we, humanity, does and the perfection that we will achieve. So it's an interesting understanding, an interesting idea. And one of the things you find as you study from Rav Ashlag is that he does not always give the complete reason in each place, because, and this is one of the problems that, for instance, Rav Isaac Luria had, is that he couldn't contain his thoughts to write. Therefore, Rav Isaac Luria didn't write, therefore Rav Shimon Bar Yochai didn't write, because it takes a unique ability to have the overflow of wisdom and still be able to confine it to writing. So, and what Rav Ashlag was able to do, and this is really one of the gifts of Rav Ashlag, because on each word here within the Ari, he could have spent years literally writing thousands and thousands of pages. But what he was able to confine his thoughts and writings to at least take us to the next point. So it's an interesting thing that you see often, certainly in the Temunas HaSfirot, in the Ten Luminous Emanations, where Rav Ashlag speaks about a point and gives a reason that might not have the complete rationale where he writes it there. He might talk about it in another place with his complete rationale, or that he gives a reason, and in another place he gives a different reason for that, and that is because that is the way he confined his thoughts in this area. So it's an interesting, again, it's separate from the understanding here, but it's also a little bit of the understanding of the rationale and the process that Rav Ashlag went through in writing this commentary. The next section, it says, "V'lo haya shum makom panui." There was no empty space. And Rav Ashlag explains, "Pirush ki b'terem shenivreu ha'olamot," before the worlds were created, "Shaya az rak ein sof baruch hu bilvad," that there was only then this world. "Lo haya sham makom panui," there was no empty space. What does empty space mean? It, of course, does not refer to a physical space. Dahainu makom chisaron. It means a place of lack. So forever now, in the writings of the Ari, in the writings of Rav Isaac Luria, in the writings of any Kabbalist, when they talk about empty space, they're talking about a lack. Dahainu makom chisaron sheyeh ra'ui lekabel bo bechinat tikunim. That it's a place where there can be corrections. And the beauty of this, again, as you start truly understanding the language of the Kabbalists, you start seeing, even within the Torah, even within sort of the literal Torah or the Nevi'im or the prophets, these words mean the same there. It's not just that the word makom panui, empty space, means place of lack or a place where correction can be made within the writings of the Ari of Isaac Luria, but it also is true within all the writings, certainly within the Torah and the Nevi'im. Ki or ha'elyon haya memale et hamakom hahu. And this is an interesting idea. Rav Ashlag is saying here that when we're saying there was no empty space, it means that there was no place for the lower beings, basically us, to The word להתגדר doesn't have a great translation, but to sort of make themselves, better or higher. And this is something, again, without getting into the details of this, Rav Ashlag in different places, when he talks about the reason, this refers to the concept, which he'll talk about, the concept of bread of shame, lechem bizayon. How real was the need for the creation of our world is a very tenuous argument. But that's what it is. That's what it is. And again, this is something that, Rav Ashlag speaks about it in different ways in different places. But the idea of the purpose of the creation was basically a need upon the vessel's part to do an action of correction or an action of earning, however that's understood, is something that is the way Rav Ashlag speaks about here in Ten Luminous Emanations, but it's something that really needs to be thought about. But before that, Rav Ashlag says, within the realm of Ein Sof, there was no place for correction. There was no lack, and therefore no need for correction. Only because of the removal of the light of the Creator, then became an idea of lack, and then there was a place that was empty, and a place that was made available for corrections. But of course, chas v'shalom, don't think that the Ari Rav Isaac Luria is talking about physical space. Avire kani. The Ari says that there wasn't any empty air. What does that mean, there wasn't any empty air? And again, this is one of these things always bothered me. Because certainly here in the beginning, and as we'll read Rav Ashlag's explanation, why did Rav Isaac Luria, when talking about what wasn't there in the endless world, he chose only a few concepts? Later on, as we continue to study, we see there are a lot of components of the correction process. There are a lot of different lights. But the Ari Rav Isaac Luria is very specific in what terminology he used, what words he used, what concepts he used to say there weren't there in the endless world. Because this list seemingly could be endless. Because if in the endless world everything was perfect, you can come up with probably hundreds of words that refer to lack that of course weren't there. So if you wanted to make a list of lack, you can make a long list. But when the Ari is talking about what lack did not exist in the endless, he only chooses a few. And this choice of saying of Avire Kani, as Rav Ashlag will explain, which refers to the Olde Chasadim, the light of mercy, is at least an interesting choice by the Ari, by Rav Isaac Luria. Rav Ashlag says, "Eina kavana lavir gashmi chas v'shalom." Of course, when we're talking about empty air, we're not talking about physical air. There is a spiritual light that is called that. And again, this is I hope I'm not overflowing, at least with overwhelming with the amount of concepts. But when you hear Rav Ashlag's explanation of the concept of Avire Kani, empty air, and then you start thinking about other places within the Torah and within the prophets where they talk about air, and you begin to understand that this is what it's talking about. When you talk about Marot Yechezkel, you talk about the visions of Ezekiel, and there's all kinds of ideas there. When you start understanding them within the context of Rav Ashlag's explanations, you begin to sense at least what they were. None of these visions of the prophets were referring to anything physical. These were all revelations basically of the wisdom of Kabbalah, of the Tamunas HaSfirot. Rav Ashlag says, in every complete revelation of light, there's two types of light. There is what's called the light of wisdom, and there is called the light of mercy, or the light of giving. What's called the light of wisdom, the Olde Chokhmah, is the essence, the true essence and light of that being, of that revelation. Its life, its essence. The light of mercy, or the light of chesed, of giving, of sharing, is the light that is the vessel or the concealer that goes around the light of wisdom. Because light of wisdom cannot be revealed without the light of mercy, or the light of sharing. And it's one of these things, again, that there is an important revelation here. The first thing that Rav Ashlag is saying is that the true essence of any vessel is the light of wisdom, the Od Chochmah. The second thing he's saying is that there can't be any revelation of Od Chochmah, light of wisdom, without Od Chasadim, without light of sharing. And this is a lesson for every single one of us. There's some people, who are involved in spiritual work, and even people in the center, who think that as long as we're involved in the process of sharing, in the Od Chasadim, then we have a connection to the light of the Creator. But what the Ari is making very clear here is that the chiyut, the life force, the true giver of life and energy is the Od Chochmah, is a light of wisdom. There has to be wisdom. We have to have understanding and deepening of our wisdom in order to truly have chiyut, in order to truly have spiritual life. And this is something, again, that Rav Brandwein says to the Rav very clearly in one of the letters, that a person cannot have chiyut, a person cannot have life without a continual gaining of wisdom. So the Od Chochmah represents wisdom. It's called the light of wisdom. So on the one hand, we have to understand that there is no chiyut, there is no life force, there is no essence, there is no energy within a person, within every human being, unless there is wisdom and a deepening of the wisdom. On the other hand, of course, and this is something that I think is clear to all of us, wisdom without sharing, Od Chochmah without Od Chasadim, cannot be revealed. And therefore, there has to be a very delicate balance between Od Chasadim and Od Chochmah. A person, as it usually often starts, with actions of sharing. So Od Chasadim, which is the vessel within which the light of Chochmah, the light of wisdom, can come in. But you cannot have only Od Chasadim. If we only have actions of sharing, but no deepening of our wisdom, we have no chiyut. We have no life force, no essence, no energy. Leitim כשהפרצופים הם בעת קטנות, when the revelations are at the lowest state, אין בהם אלא עוד חסדים בלבד. Then they are at a point at which they only have this light of mercy or light of sharing. ותדע שעוד החסדים זה, this light of sharing, הוא מכונה בשם אוויר או רוח. It's called either air or wind. ובהיותו בפני עצמו בלי עוד חוכמה, when עוד חסדים, when the light of mercy or the light of sharing is all by itself, without the light of wisdom, הוא מכונה בשם אוויר ריקני. It is called empty air. כלומר שהוא ריקן מאור החוכמה, because it is empty from the light of wisdom. ומצפה על כן שאור החוכמה יתפשט בתוכו וימלאנו. And it's waiting. The light of chesed, the Od Chasadim, the light of sharing is waiting for the light of wisdom to come in. And again, this is a lesson for every single one of us. Every single one of us has a tremendous, hopefully, to whatever degree we do actions of sharing. We have Od Chasadim that's waiting for Od Chochmah, that's waiting for light of wisdom. And to whatever degree we think that because of the actions of sharing that we're doing, we are connecting to the light of the Creator, Rav Ashlag makes it very clear, we are still only going to be on the level of katnut, only on a small level of connection to the light of the Creator. To truly connect to the light of the Creator, yes, we have to have all the chasadim, we have to add the actions of sharing that we do. But all the chasadim, light of sharing, without all the chokhmah, without light of wisdom, without a deepening of our understanding and wisdom, is light of katnut, is not a complete revelation of the light of the Creator. And it's not a coincidence, therefore, and again, when I spoke about earlier, why did the Ari use Avir Kani? Why did he use this one example of lack when he could have given a whole list? Because this revelation is important to a beginning of this study. Because what the Ari is telling us right in the beginning of the study is that all of us are Avir Kani. All of us, to one degree or another, have done actions of sharing We have done actions and we continue to do actions of revelation. But to the degree that we are lacking in all the chokhmah, and all of us are, to the degree that we are lacking in the deepening of our understanding of this wisdom, we are avir reikani. We are empty air. And hopefully and therefore Rav Ashlag uses the term umitzapeh, this empty air, hopefully the souls of every single one of us, mitzapeh is waiting. She'or ha'chokhmah yitpashet betocho v'yimalenu. We're waiting for this light of wisdom to go into us and fill us up. And this is why, at least one of the reasons, and we know that for anything spiritual, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons why the Ari chose the lack, which is referred to as avir kani, empty air, in talking about and then mention other types of lack, is because this concept of avir kani is a necessary understanding for all of us who are beginning this wisdom. To know that we are empty air, meaning that we have actions of sharing to whatever degree we do have, and they are waiting. Every action of sharing that we're doing is dependent on how much of our deepening of the wisdom that we do. And then, only then, can Od Chasadim, which is filled with Od Chokhmah, reveal its true power, its true essence. It's I hope it's clear, but it's really a beautiful understanding of why these words are chosen. One, but second, more importantly, is a real understanding of the concept of Od Chokhmah and Od Chasadim as it relates to our own spiritual growth and need for deepening of our spiritual understanding, specifically through the study of the Ten Luminous Sefirot.